Hello, everybody. So I am here today with John Corcoran, who has a very interesting history and is going to talk to us today. I'm going to, get the opportunity to pick his brain a bit about podcasts and how you can do them in a way that doesn't drive you absolutely insane with too much work and not a lot of return. Not that I'm speaking from experience when we first started or anything. Cough. So welcome, John, before we go any further. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Say. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. So before we get into the interesting world of podcasting, first I'm curious, you have a very interesting history and you've done a lot of stuff. What would you say your superpower in this life is?
Superpower. I think it's, I like to say that it's making connections for relationships, like kind of helping people to map out relationships. The reason for that is as a young kid, my father was laid off a number of times when I was younger, and I had to figure out how to navigate that world. I saw him struggle to get a new job, and we had to move across the country, across the US multiple times. And so when I got to adulthood, I realized it's all really about relationships, because that's what's going to lead to opportunities and careers and that sort of thing. So I applied that to my life, and I'm very fortunate. I've had some amazing opportunities throughout my career, not because I was the sharpest stick or because I was the brightest light bulb or anything like that, but because I think I do a pretty good job of figuring out what relationships you should build and with whom and how to go about it. And so now really that's also what we help people with as well.
Okay, awesome. So I can really see how as an individual, this can be so powerful, but I'm curious, why does the world as a whole need this skill?
Well, I mean, I think most people will say it's all about who you know, people say that all the time, and if you think about it, if you look at your career, if you look at your business, opportunities come from who is in your network, from the people that refer you, the people that vouch for you, your champions, that sort of thing. And so it really literally makes the difference between struggling and thriving. And when you put effort, you put energy, you put focus and attention into deliberately growing your network, to building relationships with the right people, not just accepting your network, like not just building relationships with the person who happens to live next to you or the person who happens to be, in a company with you or happens to be someone that you went to college with. You don't have control over any of those things. But if you take control over your life and you deliberately build relationships with the people that you want, that you really like share values with, and you want to get to know better, you'll find that you'll be in the driver's seat of your career.
Okay. So let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. And I'm going to keep connecting it to that kind of world lens as well, because that's really important to me, is that individual connections can be the difference between, I should say, individual connections when harnessed appropriately. So not just going out and connecting with the people who are around you, but seeking out other people who perhaps inspire and empower you, who are interested in similar things, who have similar goals on an individual level, can really propel you forward and give you lots of opportunities. And what I'm pulling out of that is that if we're all doing this, then on more of a community or global level, we all become enriched and we all have access to many, many more opportunities, because we're doing not just the connecting work, but kind of the critical thinking work around who is it that we can help enrich their lives and be enriched in return. Is that
right? And a critical piece of that is, how do you do it in a way that doesn't feel salesy, that doesn't feel slimy, that isn't just trying to take advantage of people, right? Because one, you shouldn't be doing that. Like, that's not a way to succeed by just, we all know people like that who are just like takers or just trying to get something from you. It doesn't work, right? So that's one piece. But also the other piece is there's a psychological piece where a lot of people feel like, well, if I have a larger master plan, if I'm doing this for my career or my vocation, then I must be manipulating people or I must be taking advantage of them. And I just reject that. I don't think that's true at all. I think there are ways that you can deliver value to people, you can build value, and you can explore synergies, and you explore if there are ways in which you can work together. I wholeheartedly think that is just a smarter way to go about life.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that has been a huge thing I've had to get over. I know personally, so to many other entrepreneurs who feel the same way. Yeah, just that idea that, oh, if I have, I love the way you put it, if I have kind of a bigger plan or bigger goals in mind, then therefore, if I am knowingly connecting with this person with the idea that it might help me, that I'm then manipulating them. But that's not the end of the story, is what I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
that if you're approaching it with authenticity and you also are, willing to share and be present and et cetera, then it's a mutual relationship, not a taking relationship.
Exactly. Perfectly put. Yeah, it is. And it can be a real win-win all around for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I certainly am where I am today because of those kind of win-win opportunities. Now, I'm curious though. So, where does, and I have my own opinions about this. So, where does podcasting fit into that world of connection? How does it contribute to making those kinds of connections and
Sure.
opening up your network, so to
Well,
speak?
ultimately, what's so great about doing a podcast is it's combining multiple things at once. And it's rare in this busy world that we're able to do that. So I started doing a podcast about 10 years ago when I was practicing law. I started interviewing my clients, and I found it was just an amazing tool for delivering value to people, giving them exposure, highlighting them, asking them questions about their career and their
Mm-hmm.
business. And then it will lead to referrals, and it'll lead to open you up to other introductions. I found that it was just an amazing tool for that. But there are other mediums. It's really ultimately about content marketing, combining content marketing.
Mm.
And so you can do this for a book. You can do this. I did it for writing for Forbes. I did it for writing for Huffington Post, Business Insider, all kinds of different publications. What I found ultimately is that was a lot of work creating those pieces of content, and I wouldn't build as many relationships. So over the course of a
Mm.
year of using that strategy, because it was so time consuming, creating that kind of content, and I was doing it personally myself, it was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
work that I found that I wasn't building as many relationships. So ultimately,
Mm.
I decided to focus my energy on the podcast, because then if you do it right, then it shouldn't take a lot of work. You should not be the person who is formatting the RSS feed, who's doing all the other pieces that you need to do in order to get it published. You should be focusing your energy and attention on having a great conversation with someone who you maybe
Mm.
otherwise wouldn't have a great conversation with, and creating content that you then share to the world, and you give exposure to that person, which is a way of delivering value to them as well.
Yeah, yeah, and this actually splinters off a number of different questions in my mind. 'Cause I really agree with you, and that's certainly been my experience with podcasts. So I think a lot of people, when they think about starting a podcast, they're thinking about it. At least I hear kind of one of two directions. One is that they think they kind of like have to or should because you need a podcast in order to succeed. It's just one of the kind of channels. But the other one that I hear all the time, and just around that first one, I'm not a fan of shoulds in particular. So my focus is more on the second one that I hear more often, which is that a podcast can be an opportunity for revenue, for bringing in more revenue. And I'm curious, how would you weigh the value of podcasting as essentially a networking tool versus podcasting as a, simply placing your funnel or a way to get more audience or, a visibility lever, essentially?
Yeah, and I think kind of like we were talking about earlier, there's two levels to that discussion when you talk about
Mm-hmm.
ROI or revenue to your business. There's the psychological piece to it. People kind of objecting or struggling with this idea of, should the podcast lead to revenue for me? And then there's the
Mm-hmm.
actual functional, like, how do you actually make a podcast produce revenue for you? And I think there's
Yeah,
misunderstandings about both of them. So I want to tackle the psychological piece first. First of all, I
for
think
sure.
you absolutely should make money from your podcast. Sooner the better. The reason is, over 10 years of doing a podcast, I've seen so many people that have started a podcast, done it for a short period of time, maybe 6 months or a year or something like that, and then given up. And inevitably, if you
Mm.
ask people, if you dig into it and you ask them why they gave up, it wasn't because their microphone audio quality wasn't good enough. It wasn't because they couldn't figure out how to, get people to say yes to be a guest. That's not hard. You can get lots of people to say yes. It's because
Mm-hmm.
they weren't getting results from it. They weren't getting ROI. They
Mm.
weren't getting return. If they do get return, then they will continue doing it. They won't stop doing it. But so that's why I say it's incredibly important. You got to get ROI and psychological. I mean, geez, you're in business, you should get return for your efforts, or else it's
Mm-hmm.
doomed to failure. Eventually you're just going to give up on it. And then as to
Yeah.
the second piece, actually get ROI,
How do you
actually get
do it?
return
Yeah.
from your podcast. Now, look, a lot of people think of podcasting in an old school marketing kind of way. They think of it as just a media source, and you're going to go get ads or you're going to get sponsors or something like that.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
is one way to do it. I'm not the biggest fan of it though, because, there's a lot of big media companies that are moving into the space, and they're
Mm,
occupying the charts and downloads, and you're putting yourself into apples to apples comparison, because if you're just charging for downloads, then people are going to shop around. They're going to look around and see who else they can find. Whereas, and this is
mhm,
who we exclusively serve, is B2B businesses. If you have a B2B business that has a high client lifetime value, and you're using the podcast as a tool for content, for up-leveling your network, for referral marketing, for strategic partnerships, all that kind of stuff,
mhm.
really like probably a new client or a new referral or a new strategic partnership is going to be worth way more than just, getting an ad for GoDaddy on your podcast and getting paid $5 or $100 for it or something like that. You're going to get a lot more value out of those other things. So we really get people who do have that kind of business to focus their
Mhm.
energy and attention on using it as a tool to up-level their network, get access to new people that they maybe wouldn't have access to otherwise, which may become a strategic partner, may become a referral partner, may become a
Mhm.
client, who knows, any of those things. Or you may refer business to them. I mean, the amazing
Yeah.
thing is I've been able to find and vet service providers that we've hired or that we've referred our clients or referred our friends to, who I've had a great conversation with. Either way, whether I'm interviewing them or they are interviewing me, it's just an excuse for a conversation. And so
Yeah.
we've actually referred tons of business the other way. So it's really a two-way street in many ways. So I think that answers the two different pieces, the psychological piece and the actual functions of how do you actually make money from it.
Yeah, yeah, that was a great answer, and I want to just make sure that I'm capturing kind of the gold nuggets that I heard there and reflecting them back at you. Pardon me. Um, so what I'm hearing from you is that your podcast should always, or ideally, whenever possible, it's a good idea to get an ROI from your podcast, because that's what provides the oomph to keep doing it, to keep moving forward. That being said, though, a lot of people, when they think of the ROI that you get from a podcast, they think of it being very kind of linear, in the sense that, okay, X person pays us X amount to be sponsored on this episode, etc. But what I'm hearing from you is that when measuring and considering the types of ROI that you are either looking to get or are receiving from your podcast, it's important to weigh all of the different factors that are coming from that network, from the mutual referrals, I love that you brought up the opportunity to potentially gain access to people you might not have otherwise, because you're giving them a chance, you're providing mutual value. It's a win-win, right? Just as you were saying before.
Yeah.
And that it's important to kind of broaden your mind, or else you might succeed in making a little bit of money, but you will not be accessing the true potential and value as, and all of our audience pretty much are B2B. And that's, so I'm hearing that part of it as well, where, you are a service provider where the lifetime value of a customer is quite high, and the opportunity to nurture and make those connections and gain access has a lot of value in itself.
Absolutely. You summed it up perfectly. I couldn't have said it better
Okay.
myself.
Thank you. Yeah, I love the way you put it so succinctly. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about kind of like specific. So someone's just getting going, they've decided, okay, they want to be able to make these connections. They're committed to doing the upfront kind of production work. How do you go about, maybe this is a super basic question, but how do you go about building an audience? How do you start, basically?
Yeah.
And what are you looking for?
The
Yeah.
funny thing is, I mean, that's usually what people jump to. They immediately jump to
Mm,
how to get downloads, how to get subscribers.
yeah.
And the truth is, there's a couple of different points I want to make on that. First of all, about 50 to
Mhm.
70% of all the downloads out there come through Apple. And Apple is not known as the most transparent company, and they don't release download numbers or subscriber numbers. There are ways you can get to it through your podcast hosting provider, but it's
Mhm.
also not all that accurate. A lot of times there's not great accuracy. So what ends up happening is a lot of people lie. So if you go on LinkedIn, you search for top 100 podcasts, you can find 10,000 results. I'm not joking. There's
Oh,
like
wow.
10,000 results. People say it all the time. And ultimately, when you think about it, what is it about downloads or subscribers? What does that do? Ultimately, all that really does, I mean, it's great to have listeners. That's great. I like that
Mhm.
and everything. But ultimately, it's about social proof. It's about proof that you are worth investing time in. So the question
Okay.
becomes, how do you get guests in order to say yes to be on your show if you have an unproven podcast or if you
Mm.
don't have a ton of downloads or subscribers and that sort of thing? And you
Mhm.
can get plenty of great guests to say yes, even if you don't have a ton of downloads. One, there are people that lie all the time, right? I'm not saying that you lie, but what I'm saying is that you're dealing with other people that lie. So how do you establish
Mm.
social proof in some other way? Well, probably there's a lot of other ways that you have social proof. It could be, that you write for certain esteemed publications. It could be that you've published a book. It could be that you've worked with certain marquee clients. It could be a relationship, a referral, someone has referred you. That's a great way, right? If you ask
Mm.
people that
Yeah.
you already have a trusted relationship, if you ask them to introduce you to their network, oftentimes you can get some tremendous introductions to their best clients, and they're already vouching for you in that scenario. Another way you can do it is just stair step your way up. So you can pick any particular category of type of individual that you want to have on the show. And you don't start by going all the way to the top, but you start by working your way up and you get more and more names. And then eventually you get people saying yes because you've interviewed all their peers and their colleagues. You've interviewed
Mm.
others that they respect, that they
Mhm.
know in their industry. And so they're thinking, wow, like I want to be part of that. They don't think about how many
Mhm.
downloads is it, but they think, well, if my peer over here said yes, then how can I possibly say no? Or if all these other peers of mine said yes, how can I possibly say no? So those are really some of the things that I would think about, because a lot of
Mhm.
people get paralyzed over this idea of, if I don't have downloads, if I don't have subscribers, I can't possibly get guests. It's not true. You can establish social proof another way. You can get lots of people to say yes. And if you do start with people who already have a trusted relationship with you, you can work your way up to bigger and bigger guests and get bigger guests on your show. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. So again, just kind of the key things I'm pulling from this. One is that people focus on audience and downloads and subscribers, but what I'm hearing from you is that it might be valuable to like shake yourself up and ask yourself why.
Mm,
Because ultimately, and it's funny because I think about this and I'm like, well, the podcasts that I really enjoy, that I get a lot of value out of, that I recommend to other people, frankly, I don't give a crap how many other people are listening to it or subscribe to it because it gives me value. And
yeah.
those companies are getting that engagement from me. Um, but rather, and this is interesting because this has been my experience, this is what I've heard from a few other people that are peers that I really, really respect, which is that if we're talking about this as a means to form connections, get great guests, create those connections, create social proof, etc., then that's where your focus should be. And in terms of how to actually achieve that, I'm hearing that people want to be part of something bigger. And we tend to think of the something bigger that we offer guests to be our audience, essentially. But in reality, it can look a lot of different ways. It can look like, you working your way up to interviewing other people. It can look like you having done other things to create social proof in that industry, like publications, et cetera, that they then, it's offering that something bigger, so to speak. I've personally, just to kind of add in my own experience, I've found that a surprising amount can come from just your personal approach as well. Like if you're doing something and have a podcast that has an angle that is different from other people, that's providing true value, and you're speaking to someone who values that thing, quite often that is open to opportunities where if I was just Joe Blow being like, hey, could we have a meeting or something? It wouldn't be, even without kind of all that weight behind it.
Yeah, for sure.
Huh.
I definitely agree with that. It's helpful to have a niche and a focus and an industry, maybe an industry that you focus on, and
Mhm.
or a region or something like that.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't do a good enough job of that. It's too broad. It's too vague. It's better to niche down. Another thing I would
Yeah.
I would say though is that honestly, like you could like a lot of people struggle with what's the name of my podcast, and I've talked to people who
Mhm.
literally been like, I've been thinking about starting a podcast for a long time. I just come up with a name, can't come up with a name. I'm like, well, how long you been struggling with that? They're like 3 years. I'm like, look, I mean,
Just
you're
pick something.
depriving yourself of like such a tremendous value of actually doing the podcast
Mm.
because you can't come up with a name. You could call it Joe's podcast. It doesn't matter. You call it Say's podcast. It doesn't matter because
Yep.
it's really more about the practice and the discipline of building relationships on a consistent basis, which becomes really a marketing tool for you and a tool for
Mm.
business development, a tool for referrals, strategic partnerships, all that kind of stuff. And just actually doing that discipline is incredibly important. So
Mm.
I would just, chime that in as my additional piece there.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm curious, as someone who's been in the podcast world for so many years, how does the experience of having a podcast change from when it's kind of like new to when, let's say, like, is there a point where a podcast kind of hits maturity? Is that a thing? If so, what does that look like? How can people expect their experience with their own podcast to change over the life of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like anything, it's a marathon rather than a sprint. And
Mm,
this is why
heck yeah.
yeah, I mean, this is why I want every little nuance and detail makes a difference. So it might seem fun and convenient at the beginning because podcasting is like a blank canvas, and
Mm,
it can seem like there's so many different things you can do. That doesn't mean that you should do them, because every little thing that you add to your process that pulls a little bit energy away from you is going to
mhm.
increase the chances of you not doing it for the long term. And I struggled,
Okay.
about 5 years ago. This is around the time my business partner and I had become business partners, and we were doing events. It was mostly an event-based business. We weren't helping people with a podcast at that time. And I was almost ready to give up my podcast because that year I had only published about 7 episodes because I was stuck in the weeds.
Mm,
I had hired some people to handle some pieces of it, but I was overseeing it all, and it was draining my energy, and I didn't enjoy doing it. And so I said, you got to help me with this. And he helped me to like rip that stuff out of the way, focus on the highest and best use of my time, which is using the podcast
mm,
to have a great conversation with someone that I enjoy talking to, which gave me energy instead of draining my energy, delegated all the rest. And it made a huge difference. So that's what I would say as far as
mm.
maturity. If you want to get to a point of maturity, you have to make sure that you have great systems in place. You have to make sure you have great processes in place. You take stuff off your plate, you get out of the weeds, you focus on the highest, best use of your time. Again, if you have got a high client lifetime value, if you got a lifetime value that's 50,000, 100,000, 250,000, $1 million, whatever it is, you land one client, and that's going to make a huge difference. It's going to give you tremendous ROI. And again, like you doing formatting the RSS feed is not the best use of your time. It's not going to lead to greater chances of you getting another client, but you having another conversation with another potential client or referral partner that will lead to you potentially getting another client in the door. So making sure that you
Right,
delegate,
right.
take the pieces
Mhm.
off your plate, making sure that you're focused, you have a good strategy in place, that you're focused on getting ROI from it so that you're less
Mhm.
likely to give up at some point. You're less likely to get discouraged. You're less likely to feel like you aren't getting return for your efforts and go chase some other shiny object. So those are really the most important pieces, is making sure that you do those things. And that will get you to a point of maturity, get you over that hurdle that, almost killed my podcast about 5 years ago.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Surprise, surprise. Processes, being willing to delegate, and focusing on the high value work. Like, this is reminding me a lot of a conversation. I think it was with a gentleman named Philip Morgan. Anyway, he talks about how there's the $10 an hour work, the $100 an hour work, and the $1,000 an hour work. And in your head, what I'm hearing from you is that in your head, podcasts can be all kind of squooshed together. But even within the podcast project, what elements of it are you doing that's really the $1,000 work? And I'm hearing that creating the connections, creating the
Yeah.
connections, having the conversations, asking the good questions, digging in, showing real concern and care. These are the things that are really giving value. Whereas potentially, as you said, updating the RSS feed. In my case, editing. Oh gosh, there's the yeah that would
Well,
kill my love
and that can be a
very
challenge.
quickly.
That can be a challenge too. I mean, especially because you're a writer, I'm a writer. Naturally, I often say that with a business, your greatest strength eventually becomes your greatest bottleneck, because it becomes the thing that
Mm.
you view as your strength, and so you're least likely to give that up. You're most likely to hold on to
Oh, I
that.
feel called out.
Right? I've been there. I totally understand it. Now we
Mhm.
employ a bunch of writers, but it took me a while
Yeah.
in order to get to that point, because for the longest time I thought it had to be me doing it, and I
Yep.
struggled, with this kind of like perfection, needing it to be perfect, right? And
Yeah.
so a
Yeah.
lot of people, especially people who come from a media world, who come from television or less so radio people tend
Mm.
to naturally go into podcasting, but people who come from
Makes sense.
TV, they put way too much effort. And I think this gets back to a point I think you asked about earlier. They put way too much effort into creating perfection with the podcast. Podcasting is a
Yeah.
different medium. People are listening in through their earbuds to a conversation between two people, and they don't expect
Yeah.
perfection,
Yeah.
unless they're listening to like, some recycled version of ESPN Game Day or something that's in a podcast version. But when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to most podcasts, they're expecting an authentic conversation between two people. And if the dog comes in the middle and barks, that might humanize you a little bit. They kind of feel like, I get a little bit of a glimpse into that person's real life. I mean, you see that sometimes you see like a big celebrity or someone that you kind of like held up on a pedestal, you know, and then you see their dogs come in or their kids come in or something. And it's like really humanizes them. So I think that's part of the reason that podcasts have taken on so much, is because they have an unvarnished truth to them. And so I think a lot of times people put too much energy and effort, and that drains their energy into trying to create some perfection from it. And they shouldn't be doing that.
Oh, yes. We have a saying, done is the new perfect. And
Yes, I
we
love
say
that.
it all the freaking time because we're all perfectionists on my team. And
Done
it has
is the new yeah, it's
done
cool.
is the new perfect. Yeah.
My
and I
buddy
can't take credit
Ian,
for it. It was a mentor of mine, but
my buddy Ian Garlic, he has t-shirts that say version done is better than version none, I think is what his t-shirts say. But
yeah,
you gotta make,
I love that. I love that.
t-shirt.
Yeah.
You need a t-shirt for that. Done is the new perfect. That's
Done
cool.
is the new perfect. I should wear it during these interviews because I feel
Yeah.
like I'm like, yes, done is the new perfect.
Yes.
Destigmatize that concept. I think that's really important because our society places a very strong value on perfectionism. And I think that it's misplaced, because when I talk to and listen to and absorb content from the highest performing people and the people that I really deeply respect, over and over and over again, I hear this message. I hear this message that perfectionism can destroy you if you let it run rampant. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I want to bring us back around to the idea of ROI, because I'm a huge fan of metrics. And what I'm hearing from you is that I'm hearing kind of both sides of it. One is that there are concrete numbers that we can assign here, such as customer lifetime value, et cetera. But also that the ROI that you get can sometimes be a little harder to measure because it is in these kind of relationships and opportunities and stuff. So I'm curious, if someone is looking to plan for ROI for their podcast from the beginning, are there specific things that they can set goals around or do some thinking around that can then later be measured against those goals to see if it's successful? And if not, how would you suggest measuring success instead?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that the best way to do that is to, keep track from kind of the other end, rather than looking straight at the podcast, but looking at the other end, looking at the end of the line, which is how many what clients come in the door and how they came in, and then tracing them back where they came from. And really, a lot of times I think people will be surprised once you start doing a podcast to see the different ways in which it will lead to actual revenue in the door, meaning clients in the door, and sometimes in unexpected ways. It's funny. I remember talking to someone about a year ago who had done a podcast for like 3 or 4 months and then given it up. And I was like, why'd you stop? And we were talking this conversation about it and stuff like that. And then in the course of the conversation, what we were able to unpack is that the biggest client that she was working with at that time that was fulfilling her, she was loving, enjoying working with that client, had indirectly come from doing that podcast, but she'd given it up. She stopped doing it. I said, so you have the biggest client, the biggest result had come. If you weren't doing the podcast, you wouldn't have gotten this client. And she didn't even realize it, So like what I do, I have, and I've done this for years, going back to practicing law, every single client is written on my wall. It's not enough to have it on a spreadsheet or in a CRM. I have them I write their name on the wall, the date that they sign up, and I write down next to them where they came from. And sometimes it's multiple different touches. In these days, often it's multiple different touches, right? You might have, that you might have met them at a conference, then you connected on LinkedIn, you kept in touch that way, and then you connected on Facebook, and then you did an interview for the podcast, and they referred someone else, and then a month later they became a client. It might be a roundabout kind of way. So I do those things, and if I do that, I've done this exercise where I've gone back and I've looked at, like, for example, podcast guests, and I've been able to trace revenue directly to like a large numbers of them, like big swaths, but check marks next to the names of podcasts. And it wasn't just like the guest became a client, but it was maybe they referred me to someone else who was a guest on the podcast, and then they referred me to a client. Ultimately it's especially in today's day and age with COVID, and we're remote and we can't be together as much. it's giving you a strategy and a method and a process to up level your network, get introductions to great quality people, deliver value to those people in a way that sparks the principle of reciprocity, and people want to pay it forward. They want to deliver value
Mm,
back to you, which will lead to ROI in the door. So that would be the way that I would measure it. And certainly
okay.
it's
Yeah.
not like an e-commerce business, or it's not like a digital download business where you've got
Hmm.
metrics of like click-through rates and stuff like that. But that is a way that you can track it and you can trace it back.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, which is just working backwards. Because that's been our experience too, is that I don't think we've ever had someone, call us up specifically and be like, hey, I never heard of you. I came across your podcast. I love it. I want to work with you. And that's it,
Yeah.
But what we have found is that, people were maybe waiting to pull the trigger for a year or something like that. And then they heard something, or a guest, we interviewed someone that really resonated with them. Or as you said, I interview someone, next thing you know, maybe we're doing more projects together. Now we're referring stuff to each other. So I like this idea of working backwards, and also just embracing the messiness a bit of the fact that people are going to usually find you these days through multiple touches. And that it's important to do this working backwards, because it's not always apparent, because we want that instant gratification of being like, okay, X number of people click this thing. And so if you're not getting that, it can be easy to potentially be like, oh no, I'm going to throw this away because it's a lot of work and not a lot of return. But if you haven't done that work, it could turn out that it was giving you quite a return that you weren't even aware of.
Yeah, and you brought up another point which I want to mention, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
steal your line. Done is the new perfect. So
Yeah.
content is the new networking, because if
Mm,
you use the content in order to uplevel your network, connect with great people, and then create content, that content itself can actually become even more networking. And there's a lot of ways you
mm,
can do this. For example, we like to do shout outs in our podcast interviews where we will recognize someone else in addition to the guests that we're interviewing there. So we'll recognize someone else, maybe the person who referred the person who was a guest, or just someone
mm-hmm.
unrelated. And then the podcast is a tremendous way of keeping in touch with your network, remaining top of mind. And then the pieces themselves, the episodes themselves, whether they are an interview frequently, or whether it's
Mm-hmm.
something that you've created that you are going to we call them thought leadership episodes, where
Mm.
you are creating content on your own show, where either
Yes.
you're talking into a microphone, or even better, someone's interviewing you on your own show and you're talking about your area of expertise, something like that. You can use that as a tool for networking and for accelerating your sales cycle and for educating people on what you do and sharing that on social media. So again, it's the new networking, because it's not going to some boring networking event and passing out business cards, but it's
Mm-hmm.
leveraging social media, it's leveraging online
It's
tools,
dynamic. It's
exactly,
active.
it's
Yeah.
using it
Yeah.
proactively, sharing it with people. Another example I give to people all the time is like, imagine you get an email over the weekend and you're busy, with your family or whatever, and you can't respond to that person right away. You can talk to them on Tuesday, maybe you're busy on Monday, right? Or Monday evening
Yeah.
or something. Well, imagine if you have this content and you can send a couple links to them in the meantime, say, go check this out. They're going to go listen to it. They're
Mm.
going to be that much warmer and ready to work with you before they hop on that call with you Monday evening.
Yeah, yeah. I never thought of it like this before, but I love this idea of content as the new networking. I know, as we were discussing before, I am in an obscure rural area of Canada, and my team is spread out all over, not just Canada, but the world. And then on top of that, most of the work we do and the people we serve are in the US. And right now, it's not an easy time to be networking in a personal way with people from the US, from rural Canada.
Yeah.
But I found that content, this immediately sparks me even from a content consumer side, because I think of the connection that I feel with some content producers from the things that they have been brave enough to put out and the conversations they've had, and et cetera. And I never thought of it that way. I
Yeah.
never thought of it as an opportunity to be doing that mutual connection. So I think that's really, really
One
cool.
thing that really excites me about that is that no longer does geography need to be a barrier, or something that prevents wonderful relationships from being consummated, whether it's a client
Mm,
relationship or otherwise. through these different digital tools that we have these days, you can be living in a rural part of Canada and have amazing clients that are in New York or Miami or Los Angeles or any of those places. And I think that's such a wonderful thing that you can go and find these great connections and you can collaborate together, serve one another in different forms. And I think that that's wonderful. And that the fact that a podcast can help to shepherd those relationships along, I think is just a wonderful thing that's quite inspiring for me.
Yes, me too. I'm like bouncing with excitement. Right. So obviously this sort of thing just really gets me going, and makes me really excited. But I'm curious, what gets you up in the morning? What gets you going every day?
Well, I have 4 young kids, so that's what gets me. Yeah, about 5 in the morning they start coming in and waking us up, so that's what wakes me up, literally. But I think probably you weren't asking literally, so I think probably more in a figurative manner. It's probably what I just described. It's having a business now that isn't just about dollars and cents. It's really about larger relationships. And it's kind of like that saying, if you give someone a fish, they'll eat for a day. If you teach them to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. Well, I view what we're doing is really teaching people to fish, because we're giving people strategy, and we're giving them the philosophy, we're overcoming mental blocks and all that kind of stuff, and really helping them, then getting all the technical pieces out of the way. And so that's really cool that then people can just run with it. And it's been so cool to see people create all kinds of great relationships. And I just love that element to it. That really is what gets me up in the morning.
Oh, I resonate with that so hard. We're no longer just sharing knowledge, we're sharing connection. And that's really powerful. That's kind of what
and we need it more than ever right now, considering how alienating this past year has been.
Yes, agreed. So much divisive, charged situations and behaviors and people and communities and et cetera. I too, I just feel blessed for my work, my job, my team to be an opportunity to spread and nurture connection, not just within ourselves and each other, but within the world. And gosh, certainly needs it right now.
Yeah.
All right. On that topic, what is the number one thing that you do to preserve your wellness in today's world?
My wellness, other than the standing desk, which I'm really proud of, that I'm working from right now, that definitely helps my wellness.
Excellent. Got my standing energy on right now too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, again, it goes back to my kids. I mean, that grounds me in an amazing way. I'm really fortunate I don't work from home. I work from an office that's about 4 minutes away from my house. And so like right before this interview, I had to hop in the car, drive over to my 6-year-old's school. He's in school 2 half days a week, pick him up and take him home, and then come back. And I love that they're close, that they're here, and then I can be home and be present and be around them, that sort of thing. So that's really what kind of helps me feel healthy and well.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. All right. And are there any last words of wisdom that you have for anyone who's listening today that they can just walk away with and will hopefully ring true for them?
I just go back to a couple of things that we said. I mean, echoing your phrase, done is the new perfect. Just go out there and do it. It doesn't need to be perfect. I mean, the first time I interviewed someone when I was practicing law, I just literally said, can I have like 20 minutes of your time? I'd love to interview you over the phone. I didn't even know how I would do it or how I would publish it or any of those sorts of things, but I did it anyways. Yeah. So that would be what I would say to people, do that. And then the other piece is be proactive about growing your network, because whether you do anything or not, your network will change and evolve. It's always changing and evolving. We're constantly meeting new people. We're leaving some other people behind. And you can either be deliberate about it, or you can let it happen to you, and you can end up with a network of relationships. And I'm not talking about friends. That's a different piece. I'm talking about a network of relationships for the purposes of a business that is mutually beneficial, that has great collaboration and synergies to it. Or you can have a network of people that honestly not all that valuable to you, and that doesn't lead to great synergies. You don't help one another in tremendous ways that leads to wonderful collaboration. So I'm obviously a big fan of being deliberate and growing your network. That's what I've tried to do throughout my career in a way that delivers value all around. And I would encourage other people to do the same thing.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is it's happening anyway. You can control it or you can let it happen. You can direct it, maybe not control it. You can let it happen to you, but the choice is yours. All right, John, why don't you tell the audience if they want to find out more about you, check out anything that you might have online, creep you and all that fun stuff people like to do in today's day and age. Where can they
Sure.
find you?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Say. This has been great. Rise25.com. You can also email me, John at rise25media.com. You can email us at either of those or connect with me on LinkedIn, John Corcoran, and happy to connect. And anyone has any questions about podcasting, I love talking about the stuff, as you can tell. So I'm happy to lend an ear and help out.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, John, for letting me kind of dig into your brain a bit around podcasting and hopefully for helping some of our listeners who have been on the edge understand how to just kind of move forward and do.
Exactly. Thank you.
Awesome. And to everyone who is out there listening, well, I already kind of said it, but I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you don't, I hope that you can at least just go forward and do something that maybe felt a little bit scary, that maybe might be a little bit imperfect, but will still be pretty darn cool for you to go out and take that action. All right, guys, have a good one.